Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk all about sourdough and reasons why your loaf might not be rising as much as you hope it would. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Katie and I am very passionate about homemaking and wellness and health and just all things happy home, happy life. So join me here on my channel as I go about my homemaking journey and show you guys some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. So one reason why your sourdough might not be rising as much as you hope it would could be that your starter is just simply under or overdone. And what I mean by that is just the times that you're feeding your starter really impacts how your loaf is going to turn out. So you want to catch your starter at its peak, and typically this is when it is super bubbly and active and there's a lot of life within your starter and a lot of healthy, beneficial bacteria that is going to help your bread to rise really well. So there's a lot of factors that can go into when your starter is at its peak, although some things to look out for is the temperature of your home. If it is cooler, it will take longer for your starter to reach its peak, and if it is warmer, it will take less time. So my starter typically takes about 10 hours in a warmer summer day to reach its full peak after I fed it, versus 14 hours in the winter for it to reach its full peak. And that's just because the colder that it is, the slower your starter is actually going to feed off of that flour and create that beneficial bacteria. So it's really important to pay attention to the temperature of your home and the temperature outside. That way you can kind of gauge when your starter is going to be at its peak. So the second thing I want to talk about is probably the most crucial on how your sourdough bread is going to turn out, and that is the bulk fermentation process. So it is really key to let your dough sit out for the right amount of time during the bulk fermentation process. And you want your dough to definitely have a nice rise and a nice dome to the top, although you don't want to over ferment it so it's a little overdone and there's a little bit too much bubbles, because your dough will become wet and sticky and it won't create that nice firm gluten shape that you're looking for when creating your sourdough loaf. So I would recommend setting a timer every single time you do your bulk fermentation and timing to when you think that peak is, and just kind of stretching that out 30 minutes before or after, and just kind of seeing where you find that your dough is at its peak. Once you know your dough is at its peak, then you can finally do the cold fermentation process and store it in the fridge overnight, although you really want to make sure that it is at its full peak at room temperature, because this is when the gluten structure is going to be fully formed. So before you go ahead and do your cold fermentation, I do want to talk about shaping the dough. So at first, I didn't realize how crucial this step was in the process of sourdough baking, but it is really important to not disturb that gluten structure that is fully formed during your bulk fermentation process as much as you can. And the reason for that is what's going to hold that nice round structure for your sourdough when it is baking in the oven. So when I am doing my shaping process on the counter, it is important to get that skin of the sourdough loaf nice and tight and firm. That way it holds its shape really well, although you're trying to minimize how much you're actually disturbing the inside of the dough. That way that the dough structure doesn't get destroyed. So what I recommend is to use the countertop to really pull that dough towards you and really tighten the outside skin. Although don't put too much pressure on the dough with your hands. That way when you're pulling it towards you, it's more on the outside layer of the dough. So the last tip I'm going to give you guys today about making sure that you have a nice rise to your sourdough bread is to make sure that you have some sort of source of steam while you're baking it in the oven. So the reason why you want steam is that's going to allow the bread to bake, although it's going to keep that crust nice and soft so it doesn't form a hard outside crust right away. That way your dough can really rise and open up and get a nice poofy aspect to your dough and really grow in size. And that is exactly what you want. And then once your bread has finally reached that nice, perfect size that you're looking for, you can take that steam aspect out of your oven and let the bread fully finish cooking. So you're probably wondering, how do I get steam inside my oven? And there are two ways of going about this. If you have a Dutch oven, I would recommend putting the lid on top of the Dutch oven. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the bread to cook fully, but also allow some steam from the bread naturally rising in the Dutch oven to help make sure that the crust doesn't fully form. So if you don't have a Dutch oven, you can also just place a pan of water and or ice underneath your bread while it's baking in the oven. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow some steam to rise while you're baking your bread and really keep that crust nice and soft. That way your bread can really grow in size. Once your bread has reached a peak that you are comfortable with, you can take that pan out and continue baking the bread until it is fully done. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that some of these tips can be helpful for you when you are baking your sourdough bread and trying to figure out what's going on when your bread isn't rising. If you liked this video, make sure you hit that like button below. I do put out content here weekly on my YouTube channel, and I would love if you guys joined along on my homemaking and wellness journey.